feedback and comments on it for improvement. This is a joint paper with my co-author Anuradha Guru, who was initially supposed to have come and presented the paper, but because of some reason she couldn't, so that's why I am presenting the paper. So, in this paper we are considering episodes of depreciation stress in the Indian currency market. So, exchange market pressure is selling pressure on the domestic currency, which is the Indian rupee, or excess demand for foreign currency, which is the US dollar. And when there is an excess selling pressure on the domestic currency, we see depreciation of the rupee dollar exchange rate, or a rise in the exchange rate. And there are two ways of looking at it. First is to just let the market decide and decide on the exchange rate with the interaction of demand and supply in the market. But then that can lead to a currency crisis. So very often monetary authorities, the Reserve Bank of India, also step in when there is necessity, and they intervene in the foreign exchange market. And there are two ways of intervening in the foreign exchange market. One is to sell the foreign exchange reserves to curb some of the excess demand for the foreign currency, and the second is to raise the interest rate to make the domestic country more attractive for foreign investors, and thereby absorbing some of the selling pressure on the domestic currency. So in the case of India, the Reserve Bank of India uses all of these three, combination of all of these three options in the currency market. So therefore, when we want to have an adequate understanding of the exchange rate market pressure, it's not enough just to look at the exchange rate movements. We should also look at the other two components of the exchange market pressure, and then only we can have a proper understanding of the kind of stress. Because sometimes you don't see much depreciation because of the intervention. So intervention has kind of stopped the crisis. And then, therefore, we use a EMP index, which was actually discussed in the first day of our workshop, the Exchange Market Pressure Index, which is there in the literature. And this is an index that incorporates all these three aspects of exchange market pressure into one single number. So in this paper, we compute a monthly EMP index for India, covering the period of January 1992 to December 2012. While doing so, we also improve over a few earlier attempts that has attempted to compute EMP index for India. The literature on this is very, very sparse as far as India is concerned, and we found only 3 papers that have computed EMP index. They have used the EMP indexes in context different from ours, what we were doing. So that is one thing, and secondly, all these 3 papers have used a 2-variable EMP index, using only the exchange rate component and the foreign exchange reserve component, and ignoring the interest rate component. In our paper, we try to incorporate interest rate also, because recent papers have found that interest rate is an important tool for the Reserve Bank of India in depreciation episodes of India. Then we use this EMP index to empirically investigate episodes of stress in the rupee-dollar exchange market. And then we also contribute towards a methodological improvement as to how to identify a stress situation or a crisis situation. And we use extreme value theory. And recent papers on exchange market pressure has actually used extreme value theory, like Pozo Dorantes 2003 and some other papers. But unfortunately, they have used a wrong approach, so we are trying to make some correction, trying to propose a proper approach by using extreme value theory. So our approach is different from theirs. Now we define currency market stress as an extreme value of the EMP index. Now, what is the extreme value? How extreme the value should be is a question that we will address by using extreme value theory. And then we say that a currency crisis is a continuous persistence of 2 or more stress periods. So if I can see 2 extreme values together, then we say that it's a 2 or more extreme values together, then it's a crisis situation. So we use the literature on EMP index to compute our EMP. The EMP index is a weighted average of 3 components. Firstly, ET, which is the exchange rate movement, and RT, which is the foreign exchange reserves relative to the total money supply in the economy. And the interest rate IT, which is the interest rate movement. And all of these components are weighted by their respective standard deviations relative to the standard deviation of the exchange rate component. And in the deviation from all past studies, we try to do where they have used simple standard deviations. We are using a time varying standard deviation because we expect all of the 3 components to be having time varying dynamics in their variances. So I have already explained the 3 components here. ET is the relative change in nominal rupee to USD in monthly. RT is the same for reserves to M1 ratio in monthly. And for the interest rate component, we have used the call money market rate. And all the data has been taken from Reserve Bank of India's database on Indian economy. Period covered is 1992 to 2012. So I'll show you each component of the EMP before showing you the EMP index. So this is the rupee to USD. This is how the exchange rate has evolved during this period. And the exchange rate in India currently is a managed float exchange rate. That's the de jure exchange rate. However, the de facto or the actually observed rate in the market is found to be very different over different periods of time. Sometimes it is found to be pegged to the US dollar or hard pegged to the US dollar. Sometimes it is found to be pegged to a basket of currencies and so on and so forth. Prior to 1992, we had a kind of a pegged regime where the Indian rupee was pegged to a basket of currencies of India's trading partners. And between April 1992 and March 1993, we had some kind of a dual system in which it is called liberalized exchange rate management system, which was a transitional mechanism towards a full float or a managed float, in which the dealers of the exchange rate market had to exchange 40% of their receipts in an officially determined exchange rate, while the 60% would be exchanged at the market determined rate. And then since March 1993, we have a floating exchange rate regime. And then this is the first component of our EMP index, the ET series, the relative change in the exchange rate. And this is what we will be using for computing our EMP. Some descriptive statistics of ET, it varied between a maximum of 6.7 to mean of minus 6.8 during this period, with a mean of 0.26, standard deviation 1.69, significantly positively skewed, very high excess kurtosis, which are better statistics that this series does not follow a normal distribution, and the test statistics for unit root test tells us that the series is stationary, which is obvious from the graph. And then we do Young box test for on the levels as well as on the squared series. And we find that there is significant time varying dynamics at the mean as well as at the mean. We do specification by using the standard box and contains approach to fit a proper time series model for this ET series, and then we find that going by standard SBC AIC criteria, we can specify this series to be MA1 Arch1 process. Now comes the next component, which is the reserves to M1 ratio, and the RT, which is the changes in the reserves to M1 ratio. Some descriptive statistics very much in line with what we saw for ET, similar pattern, but then the Young box statistics say that we do not see significant autocorrelation at the levels, while we see significant autocorrelation at the variances, at the second moment. So an appropriate specification was found to be a Arch1 model. So we estimate these models because we want to use these sigmas in our EMP index instead of using simple standard deviations. Then that's the monthly interest rate, overnight call money market rate, and the relative change in the interest rate is here, which is what is used for computing the EMP. And you can see that the series is more or less stable except for occasional spikes. And basic statistics show a very, very similar pattern. However, when we look at the Liang-Box statistics, we see that we don't find very significant autocorrelation neither at the levels nor at the variance at the second moment. So we consider this series to be devoid of any time dynamics. So we just say that this series is IAB. Okay, so we use this information on the individual components of the EMP index and compute the EMP index. And this is how the evolution of the EMP index looks like for this period. So the graph shows, looking at the graph, we can see three distinguishable phases of the evolution of the EMP index. The first one starting from January 92 to sometime around September 1998, which shows some degree of volatility, followed by a period which is really calm and tranquil, very little volatility. That's because we are considering only positive values of the EMP index, because positive values of the EMP index implies depreciation pressure. That is the focus of this table. And that's followed by a highly volatile phase once again in phase 3. So we kind of categorize this evolution into three phases: phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. I will show you descriptive statistics of each of these phases, but before that, the statistics and some time series properties of the entire period. Okay, so when we look at these test statistics, we can reject the null hypothesis that this EMP index series is normally distributed, which is very important because that's why we have to go in for extreme value theory approach, because these series are not really normally distributed, while the conventional method of using a 2 sigma limit or a 3 sigma limit essentially assume that your series is normally distributed. And when we do standard Liang-Box statistics, we don't see significant autocorrelation neither at the series nor at the square series. So we consider the EMP series to be reasonably IID. And that's not very surprising because we have standardized by the time varying volatilities of the individual components. So all the time series that was there, we have already taken care of by their respective volatilities. Okay, the phase 1 of the EMPI is the volatile EMPI from January 1992 to September 1998. This is the period when the Indian economy witnessed several or some episodes of instability, starting with the instability that followed the BOK crisis, which happened in 1991, in middle of 1991. And in 1993, the exchange rate was floated, the regime of exchange rate was floated, so we can see some volatility here, and this I discuss later if it identifies to be a crisis period, which will come later. And this is something a little bit East Asian crisis period. But we are just hypothesizing these values. We do not know right now whether these values indicate crisis situations. The second period, which is more tranquil, if you look at the max mean, etc., the volatility is very low, the standard deviation is also quite low, and the mean, on an average, it is negative, which means that there is a mild appreciation pressure during this period in the exchange market, which we consider to be quite good and comfortable, because this is also the period when the Indian economy was doing very, very well. It was growing fast, it was one of the largest, fastest growing economies in the world, and things like that. Then comes the next phase, which is even more volatile than the first phase. Here we have seen several spikes, several high values of the EMP indexes, again following global developments, because by then Indian economy became more globally integrated than before. before going into the second part of our paper as to how we can identify crisis events, just summarizing the statistical features of the EMP index, we find that the EMP index distribution is non-normal, positively skewed, and leptokurtic. So the tails or the extreme values are more fatter than that you would expect from a normal distribution. And these findings are actually in line with existing empirical literature. For example, Pozo and Dorantus did computed a lot of EMP indexes for different countries, some Asian countries, some Latin American countries, and some European countries, and they found all but just one US EMP to be non-normal and positively skewed and leptokurtic. And similarly, the other paper from Tines and Siregar also found for Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, etc. a similar kind of results, that EMPs are in general not normally distributed. They are in general fat-tailed, they are in general positively skewed. So we will use this information to develop a methodology which will take into account the non-normality of the distribution. So that brings me to the second part of this presentation, how to identify the currency market stress. In general, positive EMP index value indicate pressure in the exchange market, but it's the extreme pressure that is actually a stress. Or more than 2 periods of stress can be considered as a crisis. This is how we want to define. So how extreme should be the pressure for it to be called or stress or a crisis? Then extreme value is a value which occurs with very small probability. For example, in the case of conventional methodology where they use 2 standard deviation, they're actually assuming normal distribution, and they're actually saying that, okay, probability of extreme observation is 0.01, because when your distribution is normally distributed, the probability of a value exceeding 2 sigma limit is 0.01. So essentially, you are pre-specifying a very small probability of the stress. So this is what we have followed the same convention. So if a stress probability is fixed at 0.01 or 0.05, then the 99th percentile of the distribution of the EMP or the 95th percentile of the distribution of the EMP would give you a threshold for the crisis or event. So any value that is exceeding these thresholds would be considered a stress. So empirical literature has extensively used Eichengreen et al. And Fusier, Fratzer, etc. have used 2 sigma limit, and Kaminsky et al. have used 2 sigma limit, and in our previous presentations by Aladdin and Heike, they also have used standard deviation based limit. But the underlying assumption, as I mentioned before, is that we are essentially assuming that the distribution of the EMP is normal, which is not very often so. As we have found, we have cited so many literature, and our own EMP index is also not normal. So what do? We need a different methodology, and then we see that extreme value theory provides a better approach to deal with this problem of non-normality. So extreme value theory is a branch of probability theory and statistics that deals with behavior of extreme observations. For example, if you have a random sample from a variable whose distribution you do not know, you have a random sample, independent random sample, then you pick up the highest observation from the random sample and keep it aside. Then you have another sample, the second highest observation, keep it aside. And you keep on doing that 1,000 times, and you can keep on collecting 1,000 maximas. Then what would be the distribution of these maximas? Okay, that is what the extreme value theory tries to address, and this theory has been used in many branches of science and oceanography. For example, they have used in the Netherlands to estimate the height of the dikes that they should build, so that the probability of the flooding is 0.01 or something. So something like that. But in financial econometrics and in risk management literature also, very recently this theory has been used. Now, the 2 fundamental theorems of extreme value theory are the Fisher-Tippett theorem, which is not used for this kind of work, but we use the second theorem, which is the Pickens-Balkema-Dehaene theorem. The validity or applicability of the second theorem depends on the validity of Fisher-Tippett theorem. So I am just stating in English both the theorems, not in mathematics. So Fisher-Tippett theorem says that if suitably normalized extremes from n independent realizations of a random variable whose distribution we do not know, it may be normal, it may be something else, we do not know, if the extreme observations, when we normalize them with some suitable constants, if the distributions have to follow some non-degenerate distribution, then it has to be only one of three types of distributions: Lumbel, Frechet, and Weibull distribution. And these three types of distributions actually include within themselves a whole family of distribution, whole class of distribution. For example, the Lumbel distribution incorporates within it lots of thin tail distributions like the normal distribution, the exponential distribution, and so on and so forth. The Frechet type includes within itself lots of heavy tail distribution, etc. Like the student's T distribution, and the Weibull distribution is a distribution without any tail, like a uniform distribution. Now, if a random variable, if we have a random variable whose extreme observations follow Fisher-Tippett theorem, then the Pickens-Balkema-Dehaene theorem says that the extreme observations beyond certain threshold of that random variable has to be a generalized Pareto distribution. It has to be following a generalized Pareto distribution. Now, underlying emphasis is that we do not know the distribution of the underlying variable, but these theorems tells us the distribution something about the tail of the distribution. Okay, so this is Pickens-Balkema-Dehaene theorem in maths. If you're interested, you can go through. Maybe I'll give you 1 minute without speaking.
I should suggest to,
yeah,
because you have 6 more minutes.
Oh, okay, then I should just wrap up. So generalized Pareto distribution is another distribution which actually encompasses lots of distributions within itself depending on the value of a particular parameter called the xi parameter. If xi is positive, Frechet family, which is fat tail, 0, Lumbel family, thin tail, less than 0, Weibull family. Then there is a well-known approach developed by McNeil and Frey in 2003, which they have used for computing value at risk, etc. Something else. And this peaks over threshold approach is based on the Pickens-Balkema-Dehaene theorem. And using that this theorem and some algebraic manipulation, they have come up with a nice tail estimated formula. So given a probability level, you can actually compute each and every quantile of the tail of the distribution, not the entire distribution, just the tail. So you have to choose the threshold where the tail starts. And one should not confuse between the tail threshold, where the tail is starting, and the crisis threshold, which is far beyond the tail, which resides in the tail. Okay, so we use this approach, and there is some trade-off between choosing the tail threshold, because ideally for Pickens-Balkema-Dehaene theorem to go through, we should have a very high threshold, but then if we have a very high threshold, we are left with very few observations to do our estimation. Therefore, we have to have some make a choice. So in this paper, we use the largest 20% of our 252 observation as the extreme observation, and we use these two largest 20 observations for estimating the tail quantiles. So this we use maximum likelihood estimation process. We have 50 observations to estimate the GPD parameters. K is fixed at 1.74, which corresponds to 20% of the total observation, total highest observation. And the value of xi estimated is 0.33 positive, which means it's a fat tail distribution. Not surprising, because we have already seen in our previous results. And then going by that.
So what is K again?
K is the tail threshold. Okay. Not the crisis threshold. Crisis threshold is given by the 95th percentile if your crisis probability is 0.05, 99th percentile if your crisis probability is 0.01. They are coming out with 5.81 and 13.52. So this, I don't know if you see, if I had used a normal distribution instead of this approach, this is what we would have found. These are the estimated quantiles, a lot of quantiles at different levels of probability. But since numbers may not be interesting and the graph may be more interesting, So the blue graph is the estimated at different levels of probability, the probability levels at result of quantiles, percentiles, value of the thing. And the red one is the empirically observed quantile, that is empirical observation, and this is the normal distribution. So if you use the normal distribution 2 sigma limit, for example, your crisis threshold is here, which is which is like underestimating your crisis, the risk. If you use the normal distribution, your crisis threshold is here, while what we have estimated is 13.51. It also corresponds roughly with the empirically observed quantile. Then, okay, let's skip this. And using this methodology, we have seen these periods which we can, okay, consider to be stress periods in the Indian currency markets. We have 3 episodes where we breached the 99% threshold, and we have 11 episodes altogether which reached the 95% threshold. Oh, sorry. Then these are the periods. Maybe in 5 minutes I will very quickly try to wrap up. So with having identified the stress periods, we also made an attempt to quantify what are the individual contribution of each of these 3 components to the high value of EMP. Is it the exchange rate depreciation? Is it the forex fall in the forex reserve, or is it interest rate high? And apart from that, we also tried to understand these episodes in the context of the economic environment that prevailed during this period. So some values, some figures about the decomposition of the contribution of different components. And in April 1992, it was the exchange rate component and the interest rate components that contributed towards large EMP values. And in May, it was largely the reserves, falling the reserves vis-a-vis the total money supply and also the interest rate. And this period actually is characterized by a slowdown in our economy because of the BOP crisis that happened in mid-1981. And therefore and soon after, the exchange rate market was liberalized. We had a flexible exchange rate regime. So this could be a market reaction to the crisis in the economy. And in May, of course, RBI tried to intervene, and therefore the depreciation, the exchange rate actually increased, but we see that the intervention impact, RT and IT, was more responsible for the second month. And this is a period of 2 consecutive months, so we can call it some kind of a crisis-like situation, but it did not prolong beyond 2 months, so I think that the crisis was handled. And then the next episode was November 1995, again, something like a crisis-like situation. Individual components, if you're interested, please go through, otherwise forget about it. But the economic environment, we had a high current account deficit at this point of time. In 1993-94, it was 0.4%, it was 1% of GDP in 94-95, and 1.7% in 95-96. And this was, according to RBI reports, this was also a period where USD was appreciating against major currencies, so that reflected in the depreciation of Indian rupee. Then I clubbed these 3 periods together because it's easy to explain perhaps. We saw the East Asian currency crisis around this time, but we also had the Indian economy also had some challenges during this period because the government of India embarked upon a nuclear test in May 1998, which invited widespread sanctions from the US, from G7 countries and other countries. The United States stopped foreign aid and prohibited US banks to lend to the government of India. And then we had the downgrading of our country, credit rating and all those things. So I think this could explain this period of currency depreciation. And in August 2007, that was the all-time high value of the EMP, 28.8, which reached both 95% and 99% threshold. And this was a period of high inflation in the Indian economy. So RBI had to do something about the inflation, to tighten the liquidity. Interest rate was raised. And then there was a bearish conditions in the Indian capital market, so therefore there was capital outflow from the Indian economy, and that led to 1% depreciation of the rupee. And then also there was the US subprime mortgage crisis happening, and there was that also might have affected into the stress situation. Okay. September, October, so intensity of the global financial crisis. And December, the Eurozone, concerns over the Eurozone crisis, perhaps can explain. Because there was capital flight from India because there was liquidity constraints. So, to summarize, I don't think I have to go through it. Thank you.
I think it's better if Rogerio starts and then we take all the questions to the.
Sure.
Okay.
So I can go back to my